All right, it's Tuesday, the 14th of July, and we welcome to the desk Mike Jankins, bankruptcy attorney. And we were talking earlier about something that's making the news. Everybody in the news is talking about this. It'll show up on a newscast one time or another today, talking about 50 Cent, Jackie.
That's right. So he claims, and this makes sense after spending weeks with you or months with you, knowing what's happening in the bankruptcy world. But he claims that his assets and debts range from $10 to $50 million. Okay. They also say he's worth $155 million. Okay. But he just lost two lawsuits. One that was $5 million, another that was $17 million. And now he's claiming Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would like to be in his position, except for the judgments.
So we're wondering, did he move some money around and then say, oh, I need to file? Or what do you think his process was?
You can't really move money around because there's got to be disclosure of anything you've done with your assets for 2 years back from your bankruptcy filing. So there's really no hiding the ball. Without having read all the details of his bankruptcy, and it's been very recent, it just hit the news, I would speculate that because of these judgments, he wants to reorganize his debt through the bankruptcy court and try to finesse a lower payment to the people that he owes on these judgments rather than what he's been ordered to pay by a jury or a court.
Okay.
And rather than going through the very expensive process of appeals in the court system, and I don't know if he had ever appealed those or not, it may be a more efficient way for him to pay out a lower amount than he might otherwise have to pay out.
Now, in general, how much lower would he be able to get away with?
I mean, it's who you can't imagine. I mean, it's just
half.
It's potentially, but with all the assets he has, probably not half. And I'm sure he's got very good attorneys.
Yeah.
And, he can afford some attorneys. But it's one of those things when you see a guy putting stacks of $100 bills in a Lamborghini, and the next thing he's like, oh, I got to file for bankruptcy. It's like, do judges look at that and be like, no, buddy, pay your debts, or they look at it according to what he has and what he doesn't?
Well, in some Chapter 11s, I mean, a person may in fact pay the great majority of their debt back, and had he not had these judgments against him, I'm sure he was plenty solvent that he probably was managing just fine.
Well, wasn't he on a list not too long ago about
a couple months ago for the richest rappers of all time?
Yeah, so. And he may have all kinds of complicated business setups too, so I'm sure his bankruptcy filing is extremely complicated, and I'm sure the persons that he owes the money to in the judgments aren't particularly thrilled about the fact it's in bankruptcy court now, because it's a long, protracted process.
Would you be excited if 50 Cent walked into your office and said, hey, I want to file a Chapter 11?
Well, if I did those bankruptcies, I would probably be tickled, but I'd probably be telling Mr. Cent I have to refer him to another attorney.
Mr. Cent, I'm sorry.
Well, here's something that we can talk about that's equally as sexy. How about lien stripping?
Ooh.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody was tuning in this morning because they want to know who's stripping on the show today, who's this lien person. But no, in bankruptcy, there's a concept called lien stripping. So what it is most people, when they file bankruptcy, they're of the belief that if you want to keep your home, you've got to pay your mortgages. They better be of that belief anyway, or at least their lawyer should have told them that. So if you've got a first mortgage with Wells Fargo and you want to keep the house, you got to pay them. If you got a second mortgage on there with Chase Mortgage, well, you got to pay them too. Just because they're second, they still have the same rights to take away your house. So there's a process in bankruptcy where, under certain conditions, you can remove that second loan from Chase. And sometimes people have 3 loans against their house. Haven't seen that for a while. Before 2008, we saw that quite a bit. But I think, at least in the short term, the mortgage companies and banks wised up a little bit. I'm sure those things will come back in the future, but they haven't been as prevalent now. And so in a bankruptcy, not Chapter 7 though, in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, there's situations where we can get rid of that second mortgage off the house. They will still get some money, but it won't be against their house. And they'll receive the same amount of money as like the credit cards would in a Chapter 13. So if you're paying 40% of that back in your Chapter 13, then that's what they would get. Now, you cannot do this in a regular bankruptcy in a Chapter 7. In other segments, I've emphasized the uniqueness of Chapter 13 and how we can do all kinds of special things in that, and this is one of them. The question about whether you could do this in a Chapter 7 was just recently decided by the United States Supreme Court in their last session that they finished in June. And that issue of bankruptcy went all the way up to the highest court in the United States, surprisingly enough. And they said, no, can't do it. And now, in that particular case, they essentially just upheld a previous decision that they had made on the same issue a number of years ago back. I can't remember the exact year. It was probably in the late 90s, early 2000s on the same issue. And someone somehow got it back up there again. But in Chapter 13, if you've got the right situation, you've got a mortgage on your first mortgage and you're underwater on that. So if your home's worth $150,000 and you owe Wells Fargo $160,000, you have no equity in your property. It's all eaten up by them and you're a little bit underwater. So then if you have this mortgage with Chase that I was referencing earlier, and let's say you owe them $50,000, not a good situation for Chase, but they knew when they were given a mortgage it wasn't a good deal and they shouldn't have done it. Well, there's no equity for them. It was all eaten up by Wells Fargo. So in Chapter 13, we have this process where, because of the nuances of the statute and the special procedures that exist in Chapter 13, we can say, well, there's no equity there. We're not going to have to treat you as a secured creditor like the car loan or the first mortgage with Wells Fargo. We're going to treat you like Citibank credit card.
Right. So they only get a portion.
They get a portion.
What they're owed. So then they have to end up eating the rest then.
If the Chapter 13 case is successful. So I mean, a typical Chapter 13 case is going to be 5 years. Sometimes it might be 3 years, and you have to actually successfully complete it. And the mortgage doesn't get removed from the property until you've successfully completed the property or the transaction in the plan. And so you have to make it. We have a lot of successful Chapter 13s, and so we do actually get these mortgages taken off the properties, so it's a pretty big benefit in the right conditions. The mortgage companies don't often fight us on the situation.
They just accept it then.
They just accept it.
And just move on.
A lot of times they don't understand that this is going on really, and they should probably be more aggressive. And but at least in our jurisdiction, I haven't gotten much pushback from the mortgage companies, and at the end of the process, they get paid.
All right,
And that is lien stripping.
Here's how you get a hold of Mike, Iowa Bankruptcy Law Firm. Info at iowabankruptcylaw.com, iowa-bankruptcylaw.com for more information. All right, very good. Well, thank you for answering those questions. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Now we have a little better idea about 50 Cent, too, so that's a good thing. We'll be right back. This is great.